Alright, your installation instructions for the Salco Hazarsolve Eduction tubes. No, the tube with the flex handle is not to be used with spiders. Salco can be provided adduction tubes that can fit with the spiders. However, the set instruction does not apply with the straight tubes used in conjunction with the spiders. Alright, the flex end adduction tube installation instruction for the tanker cars. Note the flex end of the part numbers ending in the 103 have been finished to the tube length 111 and 111 inches to 120 and a half inches. Flex end two part numbers ending in the 110, 120, and to 127 and a half. Flex end two parts parts ending in 1116 to 127 inches. Flex end two parts ending with 116 inches or 127 inches and to 130 and to 130 and a half inches. Move the old tube. Measure the distance with the top of the face of the rail car flange with the tube installed. Measure the distance with the top of the face of the rail car flange to the tube to be installed. To this bottom of the car, do not measure the bottom of the sump. This is the DIM 1. Shown in figure 2. The overall tube of the flex end will equal the DIM A minus 3 inches. Measure from the bottom of the face of the dip tube flange, this side of the tube on it, the end of the flex tube to marked calculated measurement from step 3. With a razor knife, carefully remove the excess flex tubing with extending over the mark you made. Do not cut the blue plastic tube. Make sure the flex tubing is slid completely with the smart side of the barbs of the blue pipe. If it's not already done, slide an 8.5 inch long section transparent shrinking tube provided over the flex tube to engage large barbs about 2.5 revolution flexing tube. This will clamp and flex the tube to the piping when shrinking operation is performed. See shrinking clamp instructions below. Alright, screw 2-inch strainer end of the freshly cut flex tube. All the flex ends retainer require a strainer as the tube will not work without it. Slide with a 3.5 inch long section transparent shrink tube provided over the strainer onto the flex end until the slot straight end are fully exposed. The position clamp of the flex of the strainer together with the shrimping operations performed. See shrink clamp instructions below. When the tube is installed into the rail car, there should be a minimum distance of 1 inch between the strainer end and the bottom of the car. Note the bottom of the sump, not the bottom of the sump. The above instruction give the installer clearance 1.5 inches to 2 inches depending on the gasket usage. Alright, your reduction tube installation instructions for trailers. If the trailer tube has a flex end, please follow the tanker car instruction. Remove the old tube, measure the distance with the top of the face of the trailer flange to the tube installed with the bottom of the car. This is DIM A, shown in figure 2. The measure the distance with the bottom car with the bottom of the sump. This will be DIM C, as shown in figure 2. The installation education adduction tube without flex end trim the tube down to the flex finish length and is equal to DIM B as shown in figure 2 installed into the trailer. The above instruction will give an installer clearance of 1/2 inch to 2 inch depending on the gasket usage. Alright, your shrink clamp instruction. The shrink clamp is properly positioned using a hot air gun made with a heat shrinking, applying with a hot air, starting the clamp shrink, usually only a hot air gun, heat gun made of the application with a heat shrinking tube. The minimum temperature for the heat gun should be at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Maximum should be 1100 degrees Fahrenheit. With the temperature required, depending on the environmental conditions, do not overheat with the heat shrink tubing. Tubing scorched if it starts to turn brown. The clamp should be removed with a new piece of heat shrinking tubing applied. The shrink clamp must be best applied with holding the heat gun stationary, rotating the adduction tube, starting in the middle of the clamp, working the heat around the full circumference of the shrink tube. Once the middle of the clamp is tight, we'll heat the gun aimed towards the flex end. Continue with the shrinking of the clamp and we'll rotate with the tube at the beginning with the spiral grooves to the flex end. Be sure the heat shrunk tube evenly while visually watching the shrink to occur. Return the middle of the shrink clamp. Aim the heat gun towards the flange end of the tube. Begin to work the heat around the grooves of the tube. Let the whole assembly cool down before handling the tube. The cooling takes maybe a few minutes. After cooling, inspect the work to make sure that the clamp has been made. The shrink clamp will pull down the grooves and the strainer end will pull down convulsions on the flex end. The shrink will not put down all the way over the bottom of the convulsion of the flex end tubing. It will be approximately halfway down the convulsions. Will be squeezing, clamping on the crowns of the crest. The clamp should always be inspected before, after shrinking, always before a eduction tube is placed in a rail car to be put in service. If doubts exist about quality and integrity of the piece of the shrinking tube or finish as a finished clamp or post shrink part, do not use it. Or replacing a flex end of the eduction tube. With the remove of the shrink clamps, cut the nick of the cut or nick a place over the edge of the shrink with the contacting string over the dip tube. Doing so will allow the grasp the shrink with your fingers on the pair or a pair of pliers. Pull on the shrink at an angle around the pipe with the circular spiral motion. This action will easily tear and shrink, and all allows you to peel off the mating parts of the clamp. Do not cut off the shrink where it contacts the flex end. Do not nick or scratch the flex tubing. Doing so will weaken the flex tubing, which could be jeopardize the integrity of the material. There are two different versions of flex end tubing. See Figure 1 to determine the tube that will work with the flex tubing. And if the option A presents a just screw flex tube on the eduction tube, screw the string into the other end of the flex tube and then cut off straight over the end of the wool will not be removed the flex end for the correct fit up of the eduction tube. Follow the steps of shrink clamping. If the option B is present, the cuff of the straight end of the must be pressure for the fit over the barbs of the eduction tube. The tube should be secured by a vise and other means of clamp. Do not crush or scarf the tube. Press the flex end with the eye over to the tube and the screw with the strainer on the flex tubing. Follow the steps of the shrink clamping instructions above. Alright, we're going to zoom in a little bit more. Alright, option A, if the end of the tube it looks like this, use the flex tube to the right. And option B, this is the cuff end. Alright, backing out a little bit. Alright, your dip tube storage inspection maintenance instructions. To properly store the eduction tube, hang them vertically as they are hung and installed with a vessel. Construct with a rack with a floor or similar with the garden tool implemented rake. Include the latch retaining device to prevent the tube from dislodging falling. Another type of the storage rack. One works much like a wine stem glass holder. Eduction tubes should not be placed on the floor, stored horizontally where they are not well supported. Flex ends will be bind and tube will become bowed. The tube should lay and hang straightly and relax in use position. Alright, do not store plastic parts in sunlight. Best storage resolved with placing a rack in the out-of-the-way, low-traffic area inside a climate-controlled building. All tubes should be unwrapped upon arrival, inspected with the damaged flange gasket face of the main rigid pipe. If the tube has a flex end, check for the nicks and cuts, scratches, indentations, convulsions, or corrugations, or any squashing, creasing that may be occurred during the ship. The shrinking clamp holds the flex end of the rigid pipe. Should also be carefully checked with abrasion, cut, nicks, tears, and peel the edges. Visually inspect the clamps to ensure that they sufficiently hold flex end rigid pipe together. Next, grasp the flex end with the hook edge of the flange over the table, the handrail, wiggle, tilt, and pull the tube to make certain that the clamp is secure. The inspection is as easy to perform, will allow you to accurately determine the clamp is good or not. Wise rule of thumb: when in doubt, replace the clamp with a new one. Never allow a eduction tube to be left inside a man-wave flanges attached with any of the equipment of those whole assembly, either taken off the vessel, laid down with severely stress of the tube. Always remove the eduction tube. Store it properly. People who work with eduction pipes, sometimes emergency temporary dip pipe, do not use it. The type of the tube is usually cut off at an angle when installed though. Through Salco hazard tube. It is a high possibility the damage destroy the flex end. All tubes should be thoroughly inspected with any condition that might affect the use of the part, but include with the closed examination flange, main ridge pipe, the shrink clamp, the flex end. If so equipped, any of the doubts with irregularities should be reported to Salco product with your owner, company, supervisor, or other area. It's recommended shrink clamps the tube to have with the bend and pulled out with the rack period with the time replay with additional with a good practice with the replay with the flex every 4 to 5 years. Many of the factors contribute to the proper function and longevity of Salco Hazarsolve education tube, include with a good fluid loading and unloading practices. Ensure smooth travel time with a hard stop with all humps. Knowledge of the commodity with the come in contact with the complete tube with the proper handling and storage of the tubes, utilizing expertise with experienced mechanics. Alright, scheduled maintenance. The tube should be inspected each time on the remove of the car. Every lining inspection Shrink wrap should be replaced if the son is aware of the failure or a time in each line inspection. Hydrochloric acid and other recommended flex every be replaced every 5 years. Dip tube every 10 years. Sodium hydrochloride, sodium chloride recommended with the flex and replaced 5 years with the dip tube. Inspect for the first 5 years of the service every year after. Placement may be necessary after 5 years of service. Note the inspection criteria. Please cycle document education tube and inspection criteria. Maintenance instruction education tube can be used after listed recommended lifespan with equipment owner discretion if the parts are inspected with eduction tube inspection criteria. Commodity exposure. All eduction tube materials must be thoroughly elevated to ensure the commodity with the material come in contact will not damage. All wetted parts must be reviewed with the temperature of the chemical compatibility before being placed in service. This course holds true for any part. There are numerous factors that contribute to the success of the product. The instructions a guide with the attempts to cover the essential variables inside the Salco hazard eduction tube. Alright, so this is the bottom of the eduction tube, and then it goes into the applies 7-inch long heating tubing with a dim 1, dim B equals dim A plus dim C divided by 2. And the cut flex tube, and then is to achieve the desired length. Apply a 5-inch heat shrink tube here in the strainer, and at 1 to inch 2.5 inches from the bottom car sump. And that's dim C figure 2. So you got your bottom of the eduction tube. You're applying 7 inches of tube fitting, cutting the flex tube at its desired length. Apply 5 inches of heat shrinking tube to the strainer, a 1/2 inch. That is your instructions, installation instructions for the Salco Hazarsolve induction tubes.